Hello everyone, I welcome you in the first video of the course structure of the ancient history that I'm going to start. First, I'm going to tell you about the major sources, major books that I'm going to refer to, prepare this course for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to combine information from all the major books, all the major sources, so that it becomes easy for you and you don't have to search, you don't have to go for various information into other books. You find it at one and only one spot. So the first premier book that I will refer is a very common one. The history students, all of them know about it. Apart from them, others will also gain significant knowledge from it. So the first book is the history of ancient and early medieval India. It's written by Upinder Singh. It is a very famous book. It is a very thick book running all over the universities in India, especially the central universities. The graduation syllabus has been dealt quite in detail in this book, and all the major themes and discussions have been included for the Indian ancient history part and early medieval history part. Apart from that, the second book that I'll prefer is Early India by Romila Thapar. Now that book has its own importance. On one side, where Upinder Singh's book is useful for informative things, is useful for the UPSC and NET syllabus, especially. On the second side, the Romila Thapar's book is very useful if you want to engage yourself in deep interpretations of what ancient Indian history is carrying with it. For instance, if I say about the seals of Harappa, or for instance, if I talk about how historiography has developed, or how interpretations of early Vedic history can be made. So while reading Upinder Singh, you wouldn't find the kind of interpretations given in the Romila Thapar's book, which have been very path-breaking in Indian history and very revolutionary in itself. Third book which I'm going to refer is Ancient India by R.S. Sharma. I don't know the exact name, but the book is written by R.S. Sharma. I don't have the exact copy of that book, the new edition, but I have this old NCERT from which I read, and the R.S. Sharma's book was used to be published as an old NCERT book until this new NCERT lot was introduced in the Indian school syllabus of 11th and 12th class. So these three are major books which I am going to refer. You can go for any one of them according to your choice and preference, and combine their knowledge with my video or anything which you like. There is no compulsion. So these three becomes the basic sources. Now to supplement these three, I have two or three other sources also. First is the book written by A.L. Basham. It's included in the series called the Wonder That Was India. So the first part of The Wonder That Was India is about the ancient Indian history, written by A.L. Basham. Now that is also a very good book, very nice. In the way the arguments are crafted in that book is very typically historical. Apart from that, the last source, I guess, will be you can also refer to D.N. Jha. I do not refer to D.N. Jha's book because I have many other sources, so I do not bother about referring to it. So the last source which I'll refer to is the IGNOU course material for graduation and masters. And last but not the least, I have many different readings based on different topics in ancient India, or in modern India, or in medieval India. I have many readings which I had collected from the university level, from my teachers and friends at the university. The teachers, they publish their articles. They keep on updating the study materials they provide to their students. So I have all those materials collected. I have my own notes. I have several other coaching notes. So I can combine all of them and then present with all the information that I have on these videos. Now, when we are done with the books, the second part I want to cover in this video is the broad division of ancient history. Right? So, to introduce the syllabus of the ancient history, before introducing the syllabus of the ancient history, let us first know how this Indian ancient history have been divided, and how the changing interpretations of early Indian history has changed the way we see our past, right? So, broadly, there are three divisions in ancient Indian history, and when we go to details, it can be divided into major periods, which are again, due to periodization, divided into major chapters of different sorts. So, going to the broad divisions, it's prehistory, proto-history, and historical period. Now, when we say historical period, we refer to a period from which we start getting literary evidence to reconstruct the history of that time, right? So, historical period in Indian history is broadly starting from the time when the first Indian book, the first literary evidence, which is the Rig Veda, is being compiled. So there is this talk about Rig Vedic tradition that it used to exist in an oral form in India earlier, and it was compiled very later. So the time about which it got compiled is the start of the historical period of India, and after that we get many other written sources in the form of inscriptions, in the form of other books, other texts like Arthashastra, like Mahabhasya, and there are countless books then after that. Now, let's talk about prehistory. Prehistory is, generally saying, prehistory is Stone Age, and prehistory is the largest part of ancient Indian history, but sadly we know very less about it. So, prehistory will consist the Paleolithic age, the Mesolithic age, and the Neolithic age. So, in Paleolithic age, we were using stone tools. We were hunter-gatherers. We were using, in fact, large stone tools. And when the Mesolithic age arrived, we changed to the size of stone tools changed, and from hunter-gatherers we started animal husbandry, and we started domestication of animals in the Mesolithic age. And when the Neolithic age arrived, there happened to be a Neolithic revolution in which we started a sedentary life. By sedentary life, I mean living at a place and producing something in the fields, and that is a sedentary life, and living a family life. They started living a family life actually, and protecting your private property that you have acquired. Not private property is not the right word here. Private property did not yet develop in the Neolithic age as it happened later on. So prehistory is that period in which you do not have literary sources. You do not find any literary sources of any kind for the historical period. You may find archaeological evidences of some sort, but archaeological sources are also not very diverse. They are generally they are very scarce, and the construction of history for the prehistorical period is largely based on these meager evidences that we get out of the longest time of period in our historical in our history. So sadly we don't have much information about it, but whatever information we get about to know about this prehistory, we can reconstruct its history from those meager information only, and that is exactly how it has happened. We haven't been able to construct more detailed information about their ways of life, their culture, and their uh, their culture and their civilization. Civilization could not yet develop also. So, and that is also an assertion based on the meager archaeological sources that we have got. Now, between these prehistorical periods and historical period, in Indian context there came a proto historical period, and proto historical period for any other culture would mean that eh, the writing culture, that the literary culture did not exist for them, but it was known to the other culture, other contemporary culture for of that time, and they were talking about it. In the European context, it means so, but in the Indian context, the writing had not yet developed clearly in the proto-historical period also, and proto-historical period starts from Harappan civilization in India, and it extends up to 5 or 600 BC, when the second urbanization happened. So from the start of the first urbanization period, which is the Harappan period, to the decline of the first urbanization period, to the coming of Rigvedic Aryans, and the decline of Vedic age, or the running of Chalcolithic age in the major North Indian part, is categorized as proto-historical period. So from the start of Harappan period to the start of Buddha's age of 600 BC. Why do we say it's a proto-historical period? Because not a piece of literary evidence is available. If anyone says that how Vedic culture can be categorized as a proto-historical period because we have Rig Veda, now the problem is until 600 BC you don't have Rig Vedas as Rig Vedas compiled as a source. So some dates it some scholars date it to 1000 BC, some scholars date it to 500 BC, 600 BC. There are debates about it. So until and unless the written source is finally compiled, the historical period doesn't start. If the Rig Veda exists in the Indian culture in oral form, that does not mean you have a literary source. You don't have a literary source if it's existing in oral form and it's being passed down to the generations. So until and unless it is compiled, the historical period doesn't start. So the proto-history continues till the end of later Vedic period, and it also includes major cultures like Chalcolithic culture. Chalcolithic culture is the culture which uses copper as its major source of running economy, running its economy. So major Chalcolithic cultures of India, the Rigvedic Aryans, the later Vedic Aryans, and the Harappan civilization all come within the proto-historical period. So I hope this broad division of prehistory, proto-history, and historical period is clear. Now when we are done with this broad division, let's come to how India's history has been historically divided. So the current periodization in Indian history is very recent. Actually, it is very recent. The current periodization of modern, medieval, and ancient India is very recent. And until this periodization was done, the Indian history had been periodized as in different ways. And since this periodization has come into existence, it has put India's history in a universalistic framework, which is there, and its chronological structure has become widened and more open to more interpretations. So the earlier categorization by the historians, and they were basically the British historians who who at first started compiling India's historical sources and writing about India's history, and they started this thing called Indology, the study of Indian cultures, the study of Indian historical sources, and their interpretations and their translations. They established various societies, various uh, organizations to do this, and some of the major names from these early British historians of India are the first one I guess was Sir William Jones, who used to be an Orientalist, and he's a very big name in Indian history. So first came the utilitarians, and then came the evangelicals, and then came the Orientalists. I'll have a different video based on these ideologies. What are they? What they postulate. Before that, in short, let's just have some names of these British historians of India of the early 18th century and early 19th century and late 18th century. So Alexander Cunningham is one of them, who used to be the head of this archaeological survey of India, and he is credited with discovery of many major archaeological sites in India, like Takshila, like Sanchi, and many other sites. I just named Sir William Jones. He's a huge name in Indian history. He has made huge contributions, important contributions to Indian study of India, and then there are names of these British administrators like James Mill. He was a utilitarian, I guess. I'm confusing between whether he was a utilitarian or Orientalist. I'm not sure. But James Mill is a controversial name because it's the communal history that we have gained from British India. James Mill was its major propagator. So his first history book written for the Indian history used to run in the school in the schools of British India when India was still a colony, and when this national movement was going on, people like Gandhi, they also pointed out that wrong history is being taught to Indian people. The books of James Mill have created this communal consciousness among the people that there is always a presence of two nations within India, a Hindu nation and a Muslim nation. So James Mill's book was the major propagator of this thought, and from there this idea got copied, and it went further to the communal propagandists of later period. And there were guys like Elphinstone, and there are many other names. So what they did, and they divided Indian history. The names of major periods of Indian history was divided by them using religious terms as the major points of division. So, for instance, they would say ancient India is a Hindu period, and the medieval India is a Muslim period, and the modern India is British period. Now, this periodization had many problems, and until this new periodization of modern, medieval, and ancient came, this periodization had been carried for long by many other coming generations, and they learned from it. They developed their traditions based on this understanding that in the ancient India was a Hindu India, the medieval India was a Muslim India, and the modern India was a British India. Now the problem with this periodization is that first, it is entirely communal. You cannot claim a whole age to be a Hindu or Muslim age, right? For instance, ancient India can't be claimed a Hindu India because there is no words. There was no such consciousness like being a Hindu, right? This word itself, it's a 13th, 14th century word. It was crystallized by the 13th and 14th century when the Arabs arrived to India, and they named India as Hindustan, the land beyond the river Hindu, the land beyond the river Sindhu. Sindhu is in its Western form is known as Hindu. So Rig Vedic form is Sindhu, and a Western form of Sindhu is Hindu. So there is a similarity between H and S in the Rig Veda and Avesta, which is an old Iranian text of the same period of the Rig Veda. So when they came to India, when the Arabs and Afghans came to India, they named India as Hindu India, as the land of Hindus, the people living beyond the river Indus. Now, apart from that, you can't claim the ancient India belonging to a particular religion, because secondly, there was not the notion of there was no notion of belonging to a particular religion, because there were similar cultures who were very much assimilated, who were very much worshipping together. There were traditions there which were fused into each other, and which were very common to everyone who used to live, who was a part of that ancient Indian period. For instance, if I say there is some Buddhist, there is some Jain person, and there is a person belonging to the Brahminical sect. Now, the kind of traditions they followed were not different. The problem is if you go to the Ajanta caves, or if you go to some of these ancient Indian caves, you will find the ways of worshipping, the ways of remembering their gods, or whatever you call them. They are very much fused into each other. They are very much in their nascent stage of development. So that is why this hard-lining distinction between Hindu India and Muslim India is not right. Apart from that, Hinduism or Brahminical culture is not the only culture which is surviving in ancient India. In fact, most of the historical period in Indian history is dominated by Buddhism. So in this way, you should have named it a Buddhist India, which was also wrong. I'm not saying that is also correct. So similarly, naming the medieval period as Muslim India is also not right, because this concept of naming an entire period based on the religion of the ruling class is in itself very non-historical way of doing it, because periods cannot be identified by the religions or by the ways the ruling class divide them, or the way they are. They can't be identified as such. Apart from that, there were not only Muslim rulers who came to India. They were coexisting with the Rajput rulers. The Vijayanagar Empire was there. The Bahmanids were there. There were separate kingdoms in south. There were separate kingdoms in eastern India. What about them? They were also coexisting in the same medieval period. And the Mughal Empire, at its best. Apart from these two times, an all India empire was never possible. So what about those? What about those fragmented polities that existed for the most of the time in medieval India? And similarly, if you're naming these two major periods based on the religion, why are you naming the modern period based on your national consciousness? That is, you're naming it British. You're not naming it Christian India. By the way, you were Christians when you were arriving to India. When the British came to India, they are naming that period from that time. The period is named as British India. So there is when they are categorizing our period, they are naming it Hindu and Muslim. And when they are categorizing their own period, they are not making a religious divide there. They are using a religion neutral term, and they are naming it based on their nation. So this is how they created this communal consciousness that ancient India was always a Hindu India and medieval India was always a Muslim India. Now this came to be questioned later on, and later on when the nationalist historians came, and when the Marxist historians came, when the subalterns came, they started questioning these conceptions, and later on this was changed. Okay, so let's stop here today, and in the next video I'll talk about the changing interpretations of early Indian history, and how what are the major waves of historians that came in the Indian historical trend in historical studies, that and how they define and redefine the interpretations of in early Indian history, especially. For instance, what contributions did nationalist historians do to Indian history, start of study of Indian history? What contributions did Marxist historians have to give? What contribution did the Waltons give? So I'll in a short video I'll explain about the major waves of historical thinking developing in India. Thank you so much. I hope this is not very tough for you. I hope this is not very easy for you also. You have to keep studying also apart from listening to these videos. Thank you so much.